Jeffrey Epstein has emerged as figurehead for the pervert class in the popular imagination. He represents the awakening to the nature of the ruling element today. And I want to give a brief analysis of aspects of his activities. For a breakdown of his career, you can look on Substack. I'll link to some of what I've written. First, let's look at what joins together the different threads of Epstein's work. I found the email in which he talks about making money out of shorting shipping futures and, quote, let the goyim deal in the real world, end quote, very interesting. This idea that speculative finance is superior to the real world, real economy, production, actual value, is really at the heart of what his class represents. Oswald Spengler talks about how during the civilization phase, after a culture has declined, the money power becomes supreme. We would say speculative finance. And we now see how when the ruling class has degenerated to the point of viewing their people as a mere resource, say the native working and middle classes in Europe or in the United States, which can be replaced by cheap labor from abroad or rendered more controllable by promoting social atomization, multiculturalism, etc. Its interests, the interests of that decadent class, will coincide with people who, for historical and cultural reasons and their own grievances, also view that people with disdain, as Epstein and many of the interlocutors that he exchanges messages with do, the goyim. You can see the ethnic character of his network, or at least the longest standing core of his network, all the way through his career. So it's no surprise that supremacism is a motivating ideological factor, albeit there's differences of opinion in the emails. Like one email will talk about how Gentiles have a different soul, whereas Ehud Barak wants to import 1 million Russian Gentiles to Israel. Concerning this kind of disdain for the goyim, ethnic resentment, involvement with finance, interestingly, early Zionist thinkers sometimes criticized precisely this feature of their communities. So it's a shame that the Israeli political right has, instead of inheriting that tradition of self-criticism, prioritized penetration of Western institutions, media, finance. Now, this divorce between money and actual value corresponds to the same divorce between the erotic impulse and its purpose to form stable, wholesome units between men and women, families, child rearing, and of course it also corresponds with his extreme interest in transhumanism, the experiments he talks about running in Zorro Ranch. Money divorced from the real world, power divorced from the people, understood as an organic community, eros divorced from family, technology divorced from the human body, transhumanism, each broken apart. It's that brokenness that defines the psychology. It's popular to describe your political opponents and bad philosophical ideas as Gnostic nowadays, but this really does qualify in the sense in which political philosopher Eric Voegelin meant that modernity tends towards Gnosticism. He was drawing an analogy with Gnostic cults from late antiquity that rejected the physical world, reject the body as evil, want to be liberated from it. Well, the impulse here is to liberate money from real value through finance, liberate erotic desire from limitations through perversion, liberate technology and the imagination from the human form through transhumanism, liberate the exercise of power from any responsibility through tyranny. The disdain for innocence and the compulsion to corrupt, where the erotic impulse becomes amorphous, entropic, it's an energy in any direction, a vicious force of sterile reproduction for not persons but power. It's the means for powerful people to mutually compromise each other and to become mutually condemned morally. This is what's called the lust for domination, the libido dominandi. I should add in connection to this that the European woman as currency to be possessed and degraded, this goes back a long way. Epstein expresses his ethnic preference in that regard. The pervert class consists of a network of market speculators rigging the market, drawn together by compromat, sometimes willingly becoming compromised, sometimes not. And that compromat shades over into common perversion, common tastes. Epstein was probably a facilitator, a fixer, asset manager, hiding wealthy clients' assets so they don't have to pay taxes on it, that kind of stuff, as well as a blackmailer, very probably. Although there's been a lot of spurious stuff out there, people using AI photographs and misreading messages. In spite of all that, I think if you look at the coded manner in which they use terms like pizza and grape soda, it's reasonable to assume that something darker than we can prove so far was probably happening as well. What I think is going on here is that when one is identified with the false self, the anxious, ever-churning mind, beautiful forms become frightening because they're not a problem to be solved, and they have their own direction. They stand on their own. The anxious mind prefers broken things that it feels like it can manage and that don't invite contemplation, simple aesthetic admiration, because simple aesthetic admiration feels like death to the anxious mind. Now, crucially, the worse this gets, the more identified you are with the false self, the more perverse you might become because you feel resentful towards beauty, coherence, wholesomeness, innocence. You want to interfere with it. You want to break it. The tastes of the people in Epstein's orbit, from bankers to sultans, whoever, bespeak this spiritual darkness, this thorough swallowing up of the consciousness by the false self. The worst kinds of people have risen to the top. And on that note, let's turn to something practical, because although right-left have no meaning in the Epstein network, Bannon, for example, apparently was acting as advisor to Ehud Barak, and although a lot of the longest standing contacts that Epstein had were with figures from the left, so to speak, Bill Clinton, Ehud Barak again. And of course, the authors and scientists with whom he cultivated a relationship were mostly on the left. It's also true that he seems to have been interested in being a patron for a managed, controlled, dissident right. So let's talk about that a little bit. Epstein maintained correspondence with Peter Thiel. He was also trying to broker a connection with Barak, to whom he suggested the possibility of trying to get a seat on the board of Palantir, getting a former minister of defense from Israel, foreign country, to have a seat within Palantir, a company destined to serve as central data aggregator for the US government, apparently, including in sensitive areas like defense and security, would represent a significant penetration of Israeli interests in the US. In his correspondence with Epstein, Thiel described US foreign policy under Trump as probably involving a general destabilization of the world to lessen the strength of rival blocs and the need for US involvement abroad. Epstein refers to Brexit favorably at one point, or at least as part of an ongoing strategy to return to tribalism and counter globalism, but he frames this all in terms of finding new areas to invest in. To the degree that these statements are ideological, they seem to be a means for drawing closer to Thiel, whose standing in tech is more clearly aligned with Epstein's interests. We also have an email from someone warning Epstein about Thiel for funding strange far-right figures, but this skepticism does not necessarily reflect Epstein's own views. Beyond Epstein himself, his wider circle is connected to Thiel in some sense through Ohio, given that Ohio Senator and current VP, Vance, has long been sponsored by Thiel, and Ohio is the center of Wexner's power. Recall the state's part in the Iran-Contra affair. Ramaswamy, a political ally of Vance, is now running for governor of Ohio, and the company Anduril, a key part of the U.S. military's AI integration, which Thiel and Vance represent, headed by self-described radical Zionist Palmer Luckey, is setting up a massive manufacturing plant in that state. Thiel has also had sporadic contacts with alt-right figures. Epstein's apparent ties to 4chan's poll would be part of an attempt to patronize and manage a fake dissident right. In this regard, we may consider Epstein's friendship with Bannon, who, to judge from their correspondence, was trying to rehabilitate Epstein's reputation. Bannon boasts of his advisory role to right-wing figures like Salvini and Farage and Orban. He refers to the possible future strength in the European Parliament of a bloc that he represents, allowing them to block legislation, including on crypto, which might be of interest to Epstein in terms of investments, but Epstein doesn't show that much interest. We can account for the Epstein circle's interest in the political right by way of the writings of the CEO of the company in which Epstein was so interested, Palantir. Alex Karp, in The Technological Republic, and his letters to Palantir shareholders, lays out the rationale, roughly. Whereas for many years the West's power structure aligned with mass migration and woke causes, the resulting social instability, the danger of rising nativism, the threat posed by competitors like China, has scared members of the ruling class into retreating from that project. This corresponds with Larry Fink giving up on ESG as an investment label, for example. The fact that Global South immigrants are generally anti-Zionist also plays a role for figures like Karp, supporting more border control. Karp has also referred to AI making cheap immigrant labor unnecessary. Of course, there are good ways to use AI in robotics, and they can help with mass migration, but I don't think Thiel or Karp have the right philosophical or political orientation. The political project represented by Palantir is meant to stabilize the US, divert reactionary energy into a civic, nationalist platform, Israeli hawkishness, increased US power through division abroad, China containment, and massive integration of AI into government, including domestic surveillance. That's the fake right. Just as the beast finally turns against the whore in John's Apocalypse, an important part of the political class will present itself as conservative. Obviously, none of this research is original, and this is very, very partial, just giving some thoughts. Whatever you think about them, Whitney Webb, Dawson, on the Ohio connection, Fuentes. All right, I'm sure more things will come out. This is just a quick rundown because I wanted to get my own thoughts in order, that information which I am aware of in order, and make a few observations. So hopefully that's useful to some folks. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe if you would like to. You can buy me a coffee, join me on Substack, Twitter. Thank you again, and until next time.